the Titanic didn't just sink because it hit an iceberg. That's the version that made it into textbooks, documentaries, and blockbuster movies. But the truth? It's messier, darker, and far more shocking. Because the iceberg wasn't the real villain. The real cause lies in a string of human failures, ignored warnings, flawed engineering, and decisions driven by ego and greed. Let's break down what really happened. Everyone knows the myth. The Titanic was the largest and most luxurious ship of its time, dubbed unsinkable by the press, though the shipbuilders never actually used that word. On April 10, 1912, it left Southampton, headed for New York. 4 days later, disaster struck, but that final moment colliding with an iceberg was only the final trigger in a disaster that had been set in motion long before the ship ever touched water. For starters, the Titanic had received 6 iceberg warnings on the very day it sank. Ships like the Mesaba and the Californian were sending out urgent messages, warning of dangerous ice ahead, but those messages never made it to the bridge. Why? Because Titanic's radio operators were overwhelmed not with safety communications, but with sending telegrams for wealthy passengers. Personal messages took priority. One operator even told a warning ship to shut up because their messages were interrupting paid transmissions. Think about that. Life or death warnings were literally brushed aside in favor of passenger gossip. But it gets worse. Captain Edward Smith was a seasoned sailor, yet he chose to keep the ship at full speed, nearly 22 knots, even while entering a known ice field. Why? Many historians believe he was under pressure to make headlines by arriving early in New York. In 1912, being the fastest mattered just as much as being the biggest. And the Titanic was massive, but size didn't mean safety. The ship had a design flaw that would prove fatal. It had 16 watertight compartments meant to prevent flooding, but here's the catch. The walls separating those compartments didn't reach high enough. Once 5 compartments flooded, as happened that night, water simply spilled over into the next, like water cascading down steps. From that point on, the sinking was inevitable, and there was something even more dangerous lurking beneath the polished steel cheap materials. Recent analysis shows that the steel used in the Titanic's hull became brittle in freezing water. Worse, the rivets, the metal pins holding the hull together, were made of low-quality iron in some sections. They snapped under pressure, allowing the iceberg's impact to rip open the side more easily. Some experts believe these decisions were made to cut costs and speed up construction. Now let's talk about lifeboats, or the shocking lack of them. Despite carrying over 2,200 passengers and crew, the Titanic only had 20 lifeboats, enough for around half of those on board. Why so few? Lifeboat regulations at the time were outdated and based on ship tonnage, not passenger capacity. Even worse, the ones they did have weren't filled. Lifeboats launched half empty because of confusion, panic, and a strict interpretation of women and children first. Some men weren't allowed to board, even if boats had room. Entire lifeboats floated away with just a dozen people inside. The result? More than 1,500 people were left in the freezing Atlantic. And that's just the beginning of the strange details. One of the most powerful and mysterious figures behind the Titanic was J.P. Morgan, the American financier who owned the company that built the ship. He had a private suite reserved on the Titanic's maiden voyage, but cancelled at the last minute. The reason? He claimed he was feeling unwell, yet days later, he was seen in perfect health, shopping in France. Coincidence? Or did he know something? Then came the survivors' testimonies. Many reported seeing the ship break in half as it sank, but their accounts were dismissed by officials. For decades, the official story claimed the Titanic sank intact. It wasn't until 1985, when the wreck was discovered, that these survivors were finally proven right. So why were their voices silenced? The official investigations, both British and American, focused largely on the crew. Captain Smith, who went down with the ship, became a convenient scapegoat, but little attention was paid to the corporate decisions that led to tragedy. The ignored warnings, the lifeboat shortage, the poor materials. It starts to feel like a cover-up, and then the conspiracy theories began. One of the most famous is the Olympic switch theory, the idea that the Titanic was secretly swapped with its nearly identical sister ship, the Olympic, which had been damaged in an earlier crash. The motive? Insurance fraud. The theory suggests White Star Line knew the Olympic was too damaged to operate, so they disguised it as the Titanic, sent it out to sea, and intentionally let it sink. Sounds far-fetched, maybe, but there's one more twist. Before the Titanic ever left port, there was a coal fire in one of its bunkers. It had been burning for days, possibly weeks. Crews tried to contain it, but some experts believe the fire had already weakened the steel in that section of the hull, the same area the iceberg struck. Could the fire have made the Titanic more vulnerable? It's not just possible, it's likely. So when we ask, why did the Titanic sink? The real answer isn't simple. It wasn't just an iceberg, it was a perfect storm of arrogance, shortcuts, ignored warnings, pressure to impress, and a refusal to prioritize safety over speed. The Titanic was more than a ship, it was a symbol of human ambition, and in chasing greatness, its creators overlooked the very things that could have saved it. The real tragedy? It didn't have to happen.